I mean, the networking aspect I can't really encourage enough. Is I think getting out there, talking to people, making friends is just going to grow your network and make sure that if you do end up in a place where you're looking for a role, it'll just be that much easier when you do have folks that might be able to help you out. So that would be my recommendation: is just don't wait as long as I did to realize the power of the data community, because it is super valuable.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting skills that data professionals use on a daily basis. Plus, we always include some fun bits because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And as always, folks, happy learning. So today with us, we have Lindsay Murphy. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Monica.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming and joining us. So typically we start off our episodes by asking people about their origin stories. So if you could please let us know about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll try to keep this brief because it can be a long-winded story. But yeah, if I think back to high school, I was really in love with science and math and physics, even back in high school. When I was applying to university, though, no one had even spoken to me about engineering. So I went to a school where we had a pretty big engineering discipline, but I decided to take biology because that was something that I knew, something I was comfortable with in high school. And then when I got there, I was like, oh, look at all these kids in engineering. Like, I could have done something like that. I would have been so interested in that. So, just a side note that I think speaking to people and women, especially in their high school days about engineering, is so important, because if you don't know about it, then you can't go into it. But I started out in bio. I ended up switching into psychology, which was really interesting because I really enjoyed learning about humans and why humans do what we do and what drives us. And from there, I was able to get back into the math and the stats that I enjoyed in my undergrad. So really heavy behavioral stats in the psych program that I took. And then from there, I moved into doing research. So I thought that I was going to go into academic research, doing studies with pro-social behavior in children, and doing a lot of psychology and stats research with that. But unfortunately, if you've ever done human research, you'll know that it takes a really long time. It's very slow to recruit people, especially when it's children. So we had children, I think, under 4 or 5 years old. And so the only way that we could get children into these studies was to cold call parents, or go to actual hospitals and like reach out and say, hey, do you want to have your child in the study? So you can imagine how ineffective and difficult that was. And this was around the time that Facebook was really starting to like go out into the wild. So to age myself a little bit, this was around the time that Facebook was like open to the rest of the world, not just universities, and Facebook pages started becoming a thing. So I said to my lab, I eventually, after I graduated, became the lab manager for a little bit. And I said, hey, why don't we try recruiting moms and babies through Facebook, because moms are now using Facebook. And so without really realizing it, I was kind of doing a social media marketing campaign, and we started actually getting a lot better reception and bringing people into the program. And then from there, I got really interested in the back end of Facebook, like the Facebook Insights dashboard. If you've ever seen one of those, you can see all the insights and the analytics about what posts were doing well and what content was doing well. And so I started to dig into that a little bit more and get really interested in like, hey, look at all this data that we have, and you don't have to run studies with people to get all this data. So I started to kind of see the opportunity in tech, and seeing that you could get a lot more data that way. So from there, I kind of fell into my first data job. So I started as a data coordinator at a tech startup based here in Toronto. I'm from Canada. So I moved to Toronto and basically worked there for about a year and a half and learned SQL, learned a lot of technical skills on the job. I kind of had some of the softer analytical skills from my undergrad. So it was really a fun transition, kind of getting into the startup world and moving into that really fast-paced environment. Unfortunately, that company did go bankrupt. So it was my first job out of university, and I had the experience of knowing what it's like to work at a company that just kind of disappears. So for a few years after that, I kind of moved around into marketing analytics roles. So learned a lot about the world of marketing analytics, and especially social media and tech. And then eventually made my way back to the tech industry. So after getting some experience in a few different areas, I felt comfortable enough to go back to the startup world. And so I did kind of miss that pace. I worked for 2 years, I worked at a big pharmaceutical company before that. And I felt like, it's really, really slow. It's very hard to get anything done. The data was, kind of a mess, believe it or not, at big dinosaur companies like that. And so moving back into the startup world was really exciting. And I got to be the first data hire at a company based here in Toronto called Benchside. So I started the data team there and then actually built up a team. And then from there, I moved on to leading a data team at another Toronto based startup. But I started using DBT and kind of working more with the modern data stack and building out our own infrastructure, things like that. And that's kind of led me to my most recent role at Sakota, which is head of data. So in my current role, I am basically a data team of one. And I still get to do all kinds of fun things, but I also get to work on the product. And I also do a little bit of marketing stuff on the side as well. So get to wear a lot of different hats.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting how much the people side of things actually affects data and technology. So, can you think of like a specific thing from back in your college days, that human side, psychology and whatnot, that you used kind of like on a daily basis?
Yeah, for sure. I think this played a lot into the marketing stuff that I was doing. So a lot of marketing campaigns and data would be built around like the personas of the people that you're talking to, and like how do you build content to build something that is going to fill someone's need or like answer a question that someone has. And so I always felt like that did come back to psychology a lot. It's like you're kind of trying to, think about the audience that you're speaking to, and I think that applies not just to marketing, but even when you're building products and working in business, you really have to think about who is your customer, how do they think, what are their problems, how can you solve those? And I do think that comes back to data and data strategy a lot. So I always love to hear when folks get into data from those softer like economics or psychology or something like that, because I do really think there's like a lot of overlap there, which you wouldn't think of often. I think technical skills are what everybody thinks of first in data, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, when it's not really the case at all.
Yeah.
So, what are your favorite data problems to solve?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now with my focus, I started teaching a course on DBT last year. And so I've been a lot more focused on DBT lately. And so I think more around the infrastructure problems I find quite interesting right now. So that is a bit of a distance from what I used to be really interested in, which I would say is more like the analyst problems. But I think right now I find it really interesting to figure out, how can I build a tech stack, being a team of one at a relatively small company still, how can I build something that is cost effective but still really efficient and then is going to allow me to scale on top of it? So there are more questions around infrastructure and choices and just deciding how to spend money in the right way. So that's kind of a bit of a departure from maybe what I would have said a few years ago. I think a few years ago it was more around like how can we use data to determine the best path forward from either an analytics perspective or maybe a data science project, something like that. So yeah, I think it's kind of constantly changing for me.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk a little bit about from a hiring manager's perspective. I wore my Mythbusters shirt. I want to bust some myths on, like you had already talked about before, in that like the soft skills are kind of really what make people shine in interviews for those entry level candidates. Can I get your perspective as a hiring manager on that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is something that I preach a lot, but I think the biggest aspect of data skill sets that I think get overlooked is oftentimes communication. So regardless of what data role you're in, whether you're more on the like system side, like data engineering, or if you're more on like the business focus side, like an analyst or in the data science or even ML engineer, communication is going to be paramount to your role. And I think that's something that a lot of data people kind of overlook sometimes when they're trying to upskill themselves, like, especially if you're coming from a technical background, people who maybe start in engineering and then move into a data role, something like that. It's often really this focus on like, what tools do I need to learn? And there's millions of tools out there now. So it's really hard to kind of learn everything. But I think what gets missed is this like communication piece. So how am I going to be able to take what I'm building and explain that to a business user, or even how can I speak to a business user to understand a problem to then build the right solution from a data perspective to help solve that problem. So I think without that kind of like communication aspect, what ends up happening is you either build the wrong thing or you can't really explain to someone how to use what you've built. And so it's like you don't make it the last 10 steps, or you end up like completely building the wrong thing. So I think that's something that I know more folks are kind of focusing on now, but that is one thing from a hiring manager perspective that I always ask those kinds of questions. Like I might throw a question into an interview, like, how would you explain a VLOOKUP to someone who doesn't understand what Excel is? Or how would you explain like a SQL join to someone who's never written SQL? Something like that, to just give somebody a bit of a curveball to sort of see, how would they explain it in a way that really breaks it down and makes it something that someone who doesn't have that skill set can understand. And I think that's usually a good way to sort of assess, at least at a very high level, if someone's capable of sort of being that liaison between the business and the data.
Yeah. Yeah. So to more deep dive into kind of the fun bits of interviewing. Hey nerd, are you looking for a career in data? I would absolutely love to help you out. I just launched a data career strategy program that helps folks break into data without breaking anything. I provided a link in the show notes if you want to learn more information about it. Now, back to the fun bits. What would you say is the funnest, most unique question that you've asked entry-level candidates?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if I can think of like the exact question right now, but I always kind of, and this might be controversial because I know some folks don't like the idea of case studies. I actually really like doing a case study for people because I think it gives them the opportunity to be really creative. So if you give them a data set and you ask them to build a dashboard or build some sort of solution that's specific to the role that you're interviewing for, it gives them the opportunity to be creative with it. And I think that is always the fun part for me, is to just sort of see what someone is capable of. And I did have someone who stood out quite a bit in an interview round. We asked them to kind of choose your own data set, present a project that you've worked on, and however you like to do that. And they chose to, I think they chose to predict whether or not the Toronto Blue Jays would win a certain number of games, something like that. So they went and got all that data on their own. They modeled it. They built a really nice visualization. And you could just tell that, number one, they were passionate about that topic. Like they were obviously a baseball fan. And then they were able to kind of explain, what the probability was of their model, and they could kind of piece it apart like that. And it was actually super interesting. Like I found that very engaging. They did a really good job of explaining it. And I think when you pick something like that, where it's like you can tell that the person is passionate about it or it's important to them, it just comes through the person's personality, their how they would fit in your team. And I feel like those are really the fun particular exercises, at least for me, that you kind of get the opportunity to see what someone can really do. So yeah, I think that would probably be my answer.
Absolutely. And I know that you have a nerdy passion for electronic music. Have you ever done any data projects related to that?
You know what? I actually haven't. I wish I had thought of that, but yeah, I feel like it would be interesting to see the genres. Like I actually always nerd out about Spotify every year. And I always think it would be so cool to work at Spotify with the data that they have, but they do their Spotify Wrapped, and they kind of show like these are all the genres that you listen to, and the minutes that you listen to, and how many minutes you listen to a certain song. I feel like that's such interesting data because it kind of speaks to someone's like psyche in a way of like, what do you really enjoy? What months of the year were you listening to certain types of music? So yeah, that's for me. I always like kind of nerd out about the Spotify Wrapped episode every year, and how they must have like a crazy amount of data. I actually saw they did a presentation at DBT Coalesce, I think in New Orleans, and just talking about the amount of data they have to be able to like dig into that is kind of crazy. But yeah, I always really enjoy that. Every year my genres come up. One year I got something, oh man, I can't even remember it. It's just they make up crazy genre names, but I think it was Vapor Soul or something like that, which is like a type of electronic music apparently. But yeah, and then it's interesting because then you can kind of make a playlist from that of songs that are very similar. So I just feel like Spotify is such a cool way to interact with music because it is so data driven.
Yeah, I think another one that's kind of along that same lines is synthwave. Very
Yeah,
like
yeah,
80s, lots of neon lights and that
yeah.
kind of vibe.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely a good one to listen to while you're like working.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the music without lyrics, and you can kinda just, like, rock out and do some code.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you have a go-to artist that you use while you're working?
I do actually. I just went on a vacation where I traveled to see this DJ because I really like him. His name is Tourist, of all things. So I went on tour to see Tourist, but he's a lot of his songs don't really have like lyrics, and it's just really good like background music. So yeah, I encourage people to check that out.
Absolutely. And I assume that there's lots of neon lights and whatnot at those concerts as well.
Yes, yes, for sure.
That's so fun. That's so fun. So what I'm gathering is like while you're in an interview, it seems that your enthusiasm is what really lets you shine out in amongst other candidates.
Yeah, I think for sure that's definitely an aspect of it. I think as well, kind of, being able to come in and show that you've understood what the role in the company is about is definitely a big thing. It depends like what kind of round you're into. Like if you're in a phone screen, that's different than if you're in a case study or if you're in like a final culture interview. So definitely assessing different things at different stages. But I think what I'm always looking for in folks is, what is your ability to fit within what we're looking for the role, but then what potential do you have? Like, is there something that, is there an area that we might be able to let you grow in from a technical perspective because you're absolutely killing it in your soft skills? Like, that's something I would always consider negotiating on. And some people might disagree with me, but I think it's easier to teach technical skills than it is to teach soft skills. And it's a lot easier to find folks who are going to level you up because of their soft skills than just necessarily their technical skills. There's obviously, if you're looking for someone like at a very senior technical role because you need that, that's probably something different that you're looking for. But I think for folks who are either trying to break into data or maybe in a more mid senior role, who are trying to stand out when there's a lot of competition right now, I think the soft skills are really where I encourage folks to kind of show their skills there for sure if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would consider that myth busted and that you don't
Hmm.
need your technical skills to be at expert level, especially for those that are entering the field.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So when learning new things, when trying to enter new fields, new positions, and whatnot, what would you say are the best resources in order to learn those types of new things?
Yeah, this is a great question. This was one that it took me a little while to figure out myself. I spent a lot of time, like when for a few years there, I mentioned in my story that I was kind of like the only data person. Like I would often be an analyst by myself, or I would report to a person who didn't really do what I did, like they were in a different area, but I was like the only data person. And it was really lonely. It was like hard to learn things. I'm a really social learner, so I learn from other people and I love to like talk problems out. I'm really extroverted that way. And so I would go to like, I would get books and I would do like Coursera courses and I would try to do these things on my own. And I always found it really difficult to stay on task because it was for me, I just never found the time or I just couldn't keep my attention. So what I kind of discovered a little bit later in life was, for one, I forced myself to go to an in-person class, which was here at the University of Toronto. So I did a data science certificate. So I said, if I have a class that I have to go to and there's other people and I have to do group projects, I'm much more likely to participate in this. But then what I discovered as well, which was a lot cheaper and easier, was communities like data communities. So Slack communities, the DBT Slack community is really great. There's just endless communities, locally optimistic. There's one for women called Data Angels, and really just more of the networking aspect and that community building that I think would have really helped me a lot early in my career because I could have then said, hey, I have this problem. I don't really know how to solve it. I've been Googling like crazy and I can't really find the answer. Just being able to talk things through with people and then learn even over a coffee chat, like, what does your tech stack look like? Or how do you deal with this problem? That was like a huge unlock for me. And then what comes with that networking aspect is really other opportunities. Like you never know, you could find job opportunities through that. You could find partnership opportunities. So that is something that now I really don't take for granted at all. It's like whenever I'm trying to learn something, I head to those communities and I always kind of like search and see what people are talking about. And that's kind of like my first step now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Back when I was getting my first certification, it was like another decision. Do I go to an in-person class or do I, learn about the material on my own? And I do better in those, personal settings. But
Mhm.
again, it's like if you had a community that you can just bounce ideas off of, it's definitely something to just branch out and experience and see like what works best for your learning styles.
Yeah, that's such a great point because I think that's something that I didn't really take like good notice of on myself. It was like I kind of expected like I have to learn this through a book or I have to be able to do a course on my own. It's like maybe you just don't learn that way. Everybody learns differently, and so kind of figuring out what works best for you and then finding the right format for you is definitely going to make things a little bit easier and faster.
Yeah, yeah. I like to nerd out on learning styles. So, like people
Hmm.
that like to listen or read or watch, or you know what I mean? And so it's
Yeah.
like try to cater towards all the different learning styles,
Hmm.
just because, and even like not saying that, you only like to read. It's like you might like all three or all however many there are, but just depending on like what specifically you're trying to learn, you gravitate towards the different learning styles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one that I now when I try to read books because I find I would always like buy so many books and then I would never get around to them. So I ended up getting a library card here in Toronto and I just try to rent audiobooks. So if I have the actual physical book, I'll also listen to the audiobook at the same time. And then that way it's like I can kind of like have both mediums. So I'm not like physically doing it at the same time, but it might be like maybe I'll listen to the audiobook in the car or while I'm going somewhere and then I'll come back and like try to read through that section of the book around the same time later on. And I find that kind of like gives me a bit of both worlds.
Yeah.
And it makes it just so that I don't end up with all these books I've never read, which I still have a lot of those.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. I think that's a good way to solidify it because it's coming
Hmm.
at you in two different ways. Much like I've heard, like, if you are listening to something and you're writing down notes, then that helps you remember the topics as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually something I've noticed is like I stopped taking physical notes a couple years ago because I would just I went back and forth. I would take digital notes and then physical notes and maybe I'll go back to physical notes, but I'm left-handed, so I just get like marker all over my hand, like pen all over my hand, and then I can never find my notes when I need them. So I've gone back to digital, but I do find that I don't remember things as well because I haven't physically written it down. So there's definitely something to be said for your pen on the paper.
Absolutely. I tend to take all of my notes on my laptop or my desktop
Hmm.
because I type really fast, right? So I can like pretty much type out while people are speaking. Um, but yeah, because my handwriting really, really is bad.
Same. I have the handwriting of a doctor, and I'm not a doctor.
Yes. Yes. But maybe like just the movement of your hand going would help in that
Hmm.
respect. Uh yeah, but then my hand would cramp because I don't really write things very often. So
Yeah. It's funny because your handwriting gets worse too. I feel like the longer I don't write, then I go to write something and I'm like, oh wow, this is bad.
yes. Yep. I used to have a grocery list on my refrigerator, and I even got to the point where I was like, okay, let's not even do that anymore because I can't read what I have written. So I just take notes on my phone app.
Yeah, that's funny.
Awesome. Well, do you have any other final words of encouragement or recommendations for the listeners out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who are in the data industry already, who've been in for a while, it's a turbulent time right now. So I think just kind of, hang on, make sure that your data team is focused on demonstrating value and reducing costs, because that's, data teams get cut when you're in a place of being a cost center. So I think kind of just keeping in mind of how your team shows value is really important. And then yeah, I mean the networking aspect I can't really encourage enough is I think getting out there, talking to people, making friends is just going to grow your network and make sure that if you do end up in a place where you're looking for a role, it'll just be that much easier when you do have folks that might be able to help you out. So that would be my recommendation, is just don't wait as long as I did to realize the power of the data community, because it is super valuable.
Great advice.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. If any of the listeners have questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
Yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. So if you can find me on LinkedIn, feel free to add me. And I try to answer all the messages that I get there. So yeah, feel free to shoot me a note and I'd be happy to chat.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Lindsay. And as always, folks, happy learning.
Thanks for having me.